This is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Forgive me for my voice. I'm a bit under the weather here. All right, so feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out. The two ways to do that is through email and through YouTube. And I greatly appreciate the comments that I have gotten, and I greatly appreciate support on that with the thumbs up, and then also new subscribers. Thank y'all. All right, so as I mentioned about advertisement, that is on the mark, and when all that is said and done, I will have all of that information for you to where to look out for that. So, to advertise my podcast, that is. Because, understand, new listeners, so, might not have the frequent listeners that I have. So, my shout out to everyone. I appreciate you all. All right, so since it's Friday, I'm focusing in on all of you. So that entails that I am going to talk about literary concepts here. This time, I am going to continue out about Japanese literature. Here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned last week, I'm going to focus in on the modern period of Japanese literature. So I'll rephrase this again for new listeners and all this and everything else. So I and myself like to focus in on the 20th century for the most part when reflecting on literature. So why do I do that? I think that the 20th century was a heyday for vast change. And the 20th century also sets up the precedent for in the world in which we're living in now. And that expands out a lot globally. And so a lot of culture is seeped heavily into literature. And as I mentioned on podcasts previously, literature, it's something about literature. It's either the aspect that is in a written form, or sometimes due to certain restrictions, and sometimes overriding those restrictions, most writers, artists, so forth, have the liberty to speak candidly and really say things that are a reflection of culture. So with this said, I'm going to talk about aspects of Japanese literature from the 20th century. So forgive me for the pronunciation. The Meiyū period, from 1868 all the way to 1945. So the Meiyū period marks the reopening of Japanese to the West and the period of rapid industrialization. So here we are in the beacon of the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution, in so many ways, really transformed the way people saw themselves and the concepts of work and the concepts of home life, etc. And so this was very renowned in the aspects of what we think about Japanese culture, the aspects of living in the city, and then versus the aspect of a rural life, versus the aspects of combining all those things together in order to have a more of a transformed culture. And so many things were rapidly changing because of that. The economy, the American economy, and then the global economy was changing because of the way that people conduct business, especially with merchants. The aspects of merchants, selling products was, more industrialized, where you could get to it. Everybody could get what they wanted faster. You could get what you needed, more uniform fashions of getting what you needed. And so many things are changing. So let's embark on that and see what they have to say. So the introduction of European literature brought free verse into the poetic repertoire. It became widely used for longer works embodying new intellectual themes. Young Japanese prose writers and dramatists struggled with the whole galaxy of new ideas in artistic schools, but novelties were the first to successfully assimilate some of these concepts. In the early Meiji period from 1868 to 1880, Fukuwasa Yukachi and Water Margarine authorized Enlightenment literature. So this was the pre-modern popular books that depicted and quickly changed the country. Then realism was brought in, and this was going on in the late 1880s to the 1890s, while classicism of the Yokaya Yo and Yanamada Yimayo and Yoka Roen gained popularity. Ichiko Yuki, and it's a rare woman writer that is in this era. It came about in this era. So she wrote stories on powerless women of the age in the simple styles between literature and colloquialism. So you see what I'm saying, how the written language, something about the written language, you have the means to really speak candidly about certain topics, and then also how that this period revolutionized for women to start speaking. So that's something else. All right, so Yikoya Izumi, a favorite discipline of Yokisai, pursued a flowering and elegant style and wrote early novels such as The Operating Room, 1895, and the literary style, and later one including The Holy Man of Yakoya in 1900 in the colonial Japanese. Hey, baby girl, stop. Romanticism was brought in by Mori Yaogi, with its anthology of translated poems in 1889, and carried it into height by Tensono Yamashiki, and etc. So magazines by Mayoyo and things of this nature in the early 1900s also brought in the aspects of different elements about literature and expression. So Mori also wrote some modern novels, including The Dancing Girl in 1890 and Wild Geese in 1911. Then later wrote historical novels. So the Tatsumi Yusuki, who is often compared to Mori Yaogi, wrote I Am a Cat in 1905 with humor and satire. Then depicted fresh and pure youth in the Botankin in 1906 and the Shan Risho in 1908. He eventually pursued transcendence of human and emotions and egos in his later works, including the Yokori in 1914 and his last unfinished novel, Light and Darkness, in 1916. So the Shemayaski shifted from romanticism to naturalism, which was established in his and the Broken Commandment in 1906, and the Kataki Yamais of Futon in 1907. Naturalism hatched the I novel that describes the authors themselves and depicts their own mental states. So neo-romanticism came out of the anti-naturalism and led by Kafu Nagi and Tanayasuki and Yokora and Takamaru and so forth, and other artists of this caliber. And so on the earlier 1910s, the Naishagi and others founded a magazine. So the Sharakabu in 1910, which is the magazine. So they shared a common characteristic in humanism. So the Shaggy's style was autobiographical and depicted states of his mind, and sometimes classified as I novel in a sense. So the Rayun Yushu and the Atu Agara also was highly praised by Shuki and wrote stories including Rana Shaman in 1915 with an intellectual and analytical attitude and representation of neorealism in the 1910s. Now, when the 1920s and 30s hit, we get, going on from the Western American point of view. You got the roaring 20s and then high life and so forth, and then sunk down with the economic depression, and then we get into the depression age of the 1930s. So let's see how that, that it is a cliche, but that really says a lot about the aspects that, it really is a small world. Without us knowing, things that happen to us, whether it be in America, that leaks in the aspects of how that affects, different places, and then vice versa. And that's something to really think about, in the masses of globalization, how civilizations affect one another. Okay, so compromising such writers as Tankai and Yokai Yashi and Denju Urajami, Yurgo Mimoto, and Ingo Sata produced a politically radical literature depicting the harsh lives of workers, peasant women, and other downtrodden members of society and the struggle for change. So this is very reminiscent. I'm speaking from my point of view because I'm American, about the aspects of literature that was coming out here in the West. Particularly when we get into the aspects of a historical impact of a novel that The Jungle was, when it was exposing the conditions of the meatpack industry and the aspects and the dark side of the Industrial Revolution, and how that transcends and the work environment of everyday worker, blue collar workers, if you want to say that, but everyday workers. And then that's very reflective how this translates to the working conditions here, what we're talking about in Japanese culture. All right, so wartime in Japan saw the debut of several authors best known for their beauty of their language and their tales of love and sensuality. Notably, Jiro Tensei, and Japanese first winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, and forgive me for the pronunciation, Yaki Yoni, and the Kawabata, a master of psychological fiction. So, as Hani Hino wrote the lyrical bestseller glorifying the worldwide Tetsuko Yakishawa attempted to publish a disturbingly realistic account of the advance on Nawangi. Writers who opposed the war, including Dean Yahi and Hiroshima and Mr. Shira Kaino, and the Hidi Yuma and the Jun Yawa. So, the post-war period, wrapping up with the post-war period, and from the years from 1945 on to present. So World War II and Japan's defeat deeply. I told you to stop. What time is it? Hold on, I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. So I'm going to wrap everything up here. All right, so many authors wrote stories, as I was mentioning, about World War II and Japanese defeat. So how did that influence literature? So many authors wrote stories of disaffected loss of purpose and the coping with death. Yashumi Daizi's novel, The Setting Sun, tells of a soldier returning from Makishino, and Shui Uka won the Yomiuri Prize for his novel, Fires on the Plain, about a Japanese deserter going mad in a Philippine jungle. Now, Yukoi Mishima was well known for both his nihilistic writing and his controversial aspects, talking about ending one's life, if you know what I'm talking about, and about septikaku, and it began writing in the post-war period. No Yubi, Yokiyama's short story, The American School, portrays a group of Japanese teachers of English who, in the intimidation aftermath of the war, deal with the American occupation in varying ways. And so, as I said again, the aspect is quite interesting when we talk about history, when we read history and we learn history in school. And then, when you seek out history yourself and you really want to learn. And then the reflection of talking about history in a literary form. As I mentioned, and I'll continue to mention, the literary form, for the most part, gets that artistic freedom to really express the reality or situation of how people internalize the aspects of history and events that imply on their culture. So, prominent writers of the 70s and 80s were defined with intellectual and moral issues in their attempts to raise social and political consciousness. One of them, Shinichiro Oi, wrote his best-known work, A Personal Matter, in 1964, and became Japanese second winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. Although modern Japanese writers covered a wide variety of subjects on one particular Japanese approach, they stressed their subjects' inner lives, widening the early novels. Excuse me, sorry about that. Oh, my throat here. Inner lives, widening the earlier novels' preoccupation with the narrator's consciousness. And Japanese fiction, plot developed and action have often been a secondary interest to emotional issues. In keeping with the general trend towards reaffirming national characters, many old themes reemerge, and some authors turn consciously to the past. Strikingly, Buddhism attitudes about the importance of knowing oneself and the point and pertinence of things formed an undercurrent to the sharp social criticism of this material age. So that's quite interesting when we dig into that. So from what I understand about the faith of Buddhism, It's all about in a reflection of oneself to, the world and the environment around you. And then how do you, combat that aspects of being a part of the world in which you live in and not being succumbed to access or being succumbed to the aspects with that and leads into sin, and how to evolve yourself into your own path and be disciplined in your own path. And it's quite interesting to have this reflection in the aspects of seeing yourself with your faith when you're moving in a modern world, because a lot of times what's going on here, when we get in the 20th century, especially when we get in the 70s and the 80s, it was a cultural driven attitude that more is more and big is bigger and access is all power. And so how does that come? That is a strong conflict with the aspect, especially if you're a spiritual person and you want to balance everything out. And especially if you are a Buddhist and you're trying to, weave all that together in the aspects of being a Buddhist in a modern world. And that's really impeccable there. All right, so there was a growing emphasis on women's roles in the Japanese persona in the modern world, and the malaise of common people lost in the complexities of urban culture. So popular fiction and nonfiction and children's literature also flourished in urban Japanese in the 80s. Many popular works fell between pure literature and pulp novels, including a short of historical serials, informing packed docudramas and science fiction, mystery, detective fiction, business stories, war journals, and animal stories. So nonfiction covered everything from crime to politics, although factual journalism predominated many of these works and were interpretive reflection of a high degree of individualism. Children's works re-emerged in the 50s, and the newer entrails of that in the fields of many of them were young women brought into vitality to it, to understand these things, and it revised back again in the 80s. So manga, here we go. Comic books have penetrated almost every sector of the popular market, and that's quite true. So they include virtually every field of human interest, such as multi-volume high school history of Japan, and the adult market also. A manga introduction to the economy and the sultry take of that with the economy, because you know how it goes with, especially when we're talking about manga and the aspects of the naughty stuff with sentai and pornography, So I have to watch what I say in front of my baby because she's around me. So she loves her mama and her daddy. So there we go. So moving on. Manga represent between 20 and 30% of annual publications at the end of the 80s, and the sales was sometime to 4 billion, I believe, yen for Japanese money, economy, currency per year. All right, so that reaches the end, and I would greatly like to know what you think. So I'm going to wrap up by saying these things here. So the Japanese culture is very, especially when we go into literature, it's very influential in the aspects and the way in which we see, modern life to now. So why do you think that is? I don't know, it's kind of a no-brainer, the way the shift and the transition of the aspects and the influence of how technology changes and thought about, and you change yourself with it. Now, it's quite interesting because it's a popular notion that Japanese culture is, as far as technology, is so culturally advanced, but in much respect, in many ways, it's very balanced, and it's not as, it's still in the progress, and well, I wouldn't say in the progress. It's still in the act in which their own speed in which they want to have a cultural technology culturally influence them. Bless you, baby. And it has a lot to do with the balance and the simplicity of which they want to live their lives, and how that influence their culture. And there's a lot of respect to that. All right, so with this said, please feel free to reach out. And the best way to do that is through email and then on YouTube. All right, so tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye for now.
Hi, Mommy. What